most of us have had situations in our own families where there are rifts and these things pass. This isn't passing at the moment, and unfortunately the Duke of Westminster's wedding is, just another not a casualty in this situation.
Welcome, Emily.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's really nice to see you.
It's very exciting to be here.
And there's so much stuff to discuss because we've already had a busy day, a busy week, and it feels like Friday, but it is only Tuesday, in fact. But yesterday we had Chelsea Flower Show kicking off, which we'll come back to, and the Princess of Wales, which was really interesting, this briefing that the palace called people to talk about a new report. So this is a year-long investigation which was run by a task force which was put together by Kate last year. And they were told to come up with some plans for business on how to make life better for 0 to 5-year-olds and the people who care for them, so that they can help businesses when they grow up to be kind of profitable employees and things like that. What was your kind of main take from the way that was all done? Because, of course, the Princess of Wales is still not back at work.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. I was saying this to a colleague earlier that obviously had she been well enough, I'm sure she would have been front and centre in this launch. It's something that she's so passionate about, and, this long-term societal change is what's driving this whole interest in early years childhood. Because I think a lot of people from the outside look at it and think, oh, it's about little ones and it's all to do with nursery schools. And it's not at all. It's really to do with a long-term evolution in society, if you like, and prioritising the mental health of young children so that they turn into strong, resilient, confident, and it seems profitable adults. But the figures are just quite extraordinary, aren't they? I think it's £45.5 billion boost to the economy if they follow these measures or if they take this on board. I mean, that's got to surely get some eyeballs on it now. You'd like to think that people who are creating policy will sit up and take notice. And I think that's what she hoped would happen.
I think that's right. It's such a huge kind of estimate that they could do that if they can go into business, or businesses can help with this. And these are people like Deloitte, Lego, Aviva, NatWest. So these aren't small kind of companies. These are people with kind of a global imprint, people who know what they're talking about, hopefully financially. And I think this is the idea that, often the royal family see these things, don't they, from when it goes wrong. So they're going, I remember Kate going into a prison and looking at the people where their lives had kind of gone off track somehow, whether it's through drugs or some other misfortune that happened to them, or perhaps a poor childhood, and then ended up in prison. Well, this idea is that if they can stop that happening by kind of providing that love and support and security to families and young children from the off, then we'll have fewer societal problems.
Absolutely.
And of course, there's a financial benefit of that as well. But she wasn't there, and the palace said that we weren't to take this as the fact that she was coming back to work, were we? So
no, that's right. Look, my understanding is that this report had been due to come out a bit earlier in the year, and naturally she would have been there had she been able to. And obviously her illness wasn't something that anyone had foreseen. Unfortunately, she hasn't been able to be part of this launch. But, people recognise, and certainly I think the palace recognise, that there's a huge interest in what she does and what she promotes. And, this has come about because of her work and because of, her sort of stewardship, I guess, of the Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood. So naturally they had to give us some sort of line about her, and it was that she'd read the report and she was excited by it.
Do you think that's reassuring?
I do. Look, I think, it's really hard not to read into these things, isn't it? But equally, look, we all know people who are going through cancer treatment, and you have some days where you feel okay and some days where you don't want to get out of bed, and you can't really predict how anyone's going to feel on any given day. I think, good on her that she's still looking at this stuff and keeping abreast of it. But, it's early days, and I'm sure there'll be quite the fanfare when she is ready to return.
And you've written recently about the kind of relationship with Prince William and how that kind of strong marriage has sort of kept them both going? I mean, how do you see that playing out? How do you see those two together now? The way that he's behaving out on engagements, some of the things that he's said, where he's revealed his, the strength that they're both giving each other.
Yeah, look, I think it's extraordinary, and surely in any marriage, when one partner is facing a serious illness, the other has to pick up the slack in many ways, but it has to also be a support to their spouse. And what I found really interesting watching William recently is how much he shares his late grandmother's ability to compartmentalise. Because if you remember back to those early engagements in the early spring, I was thinking in particular of him turning up to that event with Tom Cruise, and behind the scenes all manner of stuff was going on, and yet he turns up, smile on his face, is able to get on with things. Obviously, everywhere he goes now, people are offering him good wishes for the princess, asking after her. And we know he's a very private man. He's not about to give chapter and verse on things. But, they've also shared messages to say how much the outpouring support means to them. So I think they're drawing strength from each other, but also from the wider public and the response to her illness. There's a lot of goodwill towards her.
That's right. And he said that she's been doing well, which is good.
Which is always good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it is, isn't it? I think it is reassuring in the fact that she's, still keeping abreast of the charity projects that she started way back last year. We chatted a few weeks ago with Richard Palmer about how Princess Anne accounts for 1/3 of all royal engagements so far this year.
It's extraordinary.
It's huge, isn't it? Obviously, the king has been away from public duties, and so has the Princess of Wales. So it hasn't been your usual kind of year by any stretch. But it is extraordinary that she's undertaken kind of the brunt of a lot of the work, and that lots of foreign engagements as well. Is it time for other members of the royal family, do you think, to be doing more? Or is there another way of doing this? Or
that's a really good question, and it's one we are talking about a lot, I think, amongst us as royal correspondents. Whether we see people making appearances at sort of society events or family events, that may well be the case. But it would be interesting, I think, they certainly are depleted, aren't they, in numbers, the royal family. And as you say, Princess Anne is doing an absolutely sterling job. but it also needs to be noted that that's not unusual for her. I mean, that's her year in, year out, that she's not stepped up.
Yes.
She just hasn't stopped.
Yeah. So, at the age of 73.
I think as we speak, she's in Norway
that's right.
On a visit to commemorate aspects of the Second World War, and she really just is like the Duracell bunny, which is quite something to witness if you're ever lucky enough to cover any of her engagements.
And carries her own bags.
She can, yeah, and there's a lot being said about the senior royals you're skewing towards an older generation now. Like, if I had half her energy at her age, I'd be absolutely thrilled.
I know, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? Yeah. If I had her energy now, frankly, I think I'm quite pleased with myself. But there's new polling as well that suggests that Queen Camilla is the least popular senior working member of the royal family, despite stepping up during medical treatment. I mean, in terms of the other members of the royal family, they are just much more popular. So she is still well liked, but she's still kind of ranking below. And I thought we'd kind of come a long way from, the other days when she was seen as the third person in the marriage and all that sort of stuff. How do you think she's being perceived? Do you think that the polls are always accurate when it comes to those sorts of things?
Well, it's hard to say, because you and I have seen her up close. We've covered her engagements, her tours and everything. And I just always find her deeply impressive. She's very warm, she's very funny, she's got a great sense of humour. And I think people are seeing that more, but perhaps not to the extent that they could, I think it's really interesting that there was this big documentary around Christmas time looking into their first year. And some of that came across, and particularly we heard from her sister and her close friend. And that did give people more of an insight as well. And I think it's unfortunate that there's a hangover, really, from the past, and people who perhaps haven't really experienced her or had a chance to get to know her properly. And I don't know, do we blame the crown and things like that have resurfaced over the years? It's a really tricky one, isn't it?
It is.
One thing I will say is that whenever you come away from an engagement that she's been at, the response is always overwhelmingly positive. So perhaps it's a question of people getting to know her a bit better.
And you were there, of course, at Chelsea yesterday. Tell us what it was like, because it was an interesting year, I think, because it was the first year that the King had been. He's taken on the new patronage for the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society. And it's something that clearly he and Camilla both enjoy. I mean, what was the atmosphere like there yesterday, and who did you see there?
Well, it was great. Look, and it was glorious sunshine, which always helps. I feel very sorry for the people who have gone in subsequent days and had worse weather. But look, he obviously looked like he was in his element, and I'm sure if he weren't in the role he's in, he could probably spend days there. Talking to some of the designers of the gardens he was visiting earlier in the day, they weren't quite clear about how this had happened, but he'd asked to go and see a Moroto no Ie, with a Japanese design garden that they've exhibited there for 20 years. But this year it was all about moss and how that helps retain moisture and helps plants to grow in arid conditions. And so it's just, the beating heart of what he's all about.
So he was driving that because he was really interested in those ecological gardens.
Absolutely that. Yeah. And then there was another balcony garden that he had asked to see. And that was a lovely story because the husband and wife designers were at Chelsea for the first time. And to have the King asked to go and see your garden the very first time you exhibit is quite the badge of honour. But it's interesting to
daunting.
Absolutely daunting. But there was such a focus this year on resilient gardens, so drought resistant, flood resistant, and that's so up his street, it's not true.
Well, he was talking about it long before it was popular and fashionable, of course.
Yeah, I mean, did he set the trend? Arguably he did.
There you go. Yeah, I remember him always talking about him banging on about these things, and now you wouldn't really hear him talk about something in that way because it's so much part of the kind of public consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like gardeners far and wide have caught up.
Meanwhile, Prince William carries on his work and his engagements. And this was quite a nice story that he's going to become an usher at the Duke of Westminster's wedding. But the Duke of Sussex, as we know, will not be there and will not be present on the day. It's quite sad, is it not, that a childhood friend of both of the princes, a wedding, a happy occasion, couldn't be something that might draw them together. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no other way to look at this story, whatever the rights and wrongs on both sides. It's just fundamentally very sad. And most of us have had situations in our own families where there are rifts and these things pass. This isn't passing at the moment. And unfortunately, the Duke of Westminster's wedding is, just not a casualty in this situation, but it's difficult. But you can also understand why diplomatically it might be the right thing to do, because certainly one thing the royal family are always clear about is that they don't want their presence or absence to become the focus of someone else's happy day. And we've seen over the years William and Kate not attending the weddings of many close friends because arguably they might overshadow them to an extent, but it brings with it the security concerns, the media attention and all of these things. And this wedding is fundamentally a private wedding. There is going to be a small media facility. It's in a public place. It's in a very public place. So naturally there's a lot of attention on it. But I think, for whatever reason, this decision has been made, and it is probably the right one, because that would absolutely become the story on the day otherwise. And no bride and groom wants that.
And the Hello readers love a good wedding as well, don't they?
We do love a good wedding. We certainly do. And look, this was billed when the wedding was announced as likely to be a very big gathering of senior royals. And naturally, that's not going to be the case now, given illness, D-Day commemorations. There's a whole lot going on that week. So it's not going to be perhaps as royal-tastic as it might have been, but I'm sure, nevertheless, it's going to be a very glamorous event.
And having the future king there will be a badge of honour, won't it?
Absolutely. And, of course, the Duke of Westminster is godfather to both Prince George and, we believe, Prince Archie. But it's on a school day. So I don't think we'll see any of the younger royals there.
Not skiving off for a
Yeah,
wedding.
you save a bit of cash if you get married on a Friday in general.
Do you think that's what the Duke of Duke of Westminster needs? Well, talking about Archie brings us on neatly, sort of slightly not so neatly, to Harry and Meghan's tour of Nigeria, which seemed from the outside quite successful. They took a journalist with them who worked for People magazine, and they were responsible for sort of sending out information from the tour. I mean, do you think that was a successful mission that they did out in Nigeria? How did it look to you and your readers?
It looked to me like they had a great reception on the ground. I've spoken to a few people who were on the trip who were genuinely taken aback by how warmly they were received. But you have to see it in the context of the Invictus Games Foundation, which is why they were there. They were there at the invitation of the military in Nigeria, that they're really working on their rehabilitation through sport, and this is a really big deal for them. So that was the sort of context.
Ties in with the Invictus Games.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that was the sort of broad theme of the visit. But of course then Meghan had talked about her Nigerian heritage, so that came into play, and we saw her speaking to women in leadership in Nigeria as well. So it kind of played to all the themes we've seen from the couple before. And there's been a lot of debate about, is this a royal tour in all but name? Look, it makes sense to sort of follow the tried and tested format, I suppose. I mean, yes, they're no longer within the royal family, but they do still have these very close affiliations. And again, Invictus is, such a key part of Prince Harry's thinking over the last decade, that it all seemed to go very smoothly. And I think it meant a lot, as these visits always do, to the people who are visited or whose cause is highlighted. It doesn't really matter what the technicalities are. Whether you have an HRH in front of your name, you are drawing attention to something that means a great deal to them, and that, is never going to be an unpopular move.
That's right. Well, Emily, I'm sure there's lots more we could say, but I'm sort of conscious of time. It's been such a pleasure having you in, because I know you've been following the royal family so closely for a long time. So Emily, royal editor of Hello magazine. I do recommend looking her up on social media, because she has a great Instagram account as well. And you have been listening to Royal Confidential with me, Kate Mancy. You can find more of my work in The Times and more royal news on the Times Radio YouTube channel. But for now, goodbye.